Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hi, Evan. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneur Show. Thanks so much for taking time out for this.
Hi, Jag. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Evan, my first question is, how did you get into the education domain? Did you plan for it growing up, or do you have any other story?
I didn't plan for it growing up, but I have always been sort of in this space or adjacent to this space. Honestly, I've been doing tutoring since high school. It started out, teaching middle schoolers Latin, and since then, I did a lot of calculus tutoring in college, and I'm just really passionate about sort of a one-on-one kind of uh, supplemental education. Yeah, a lot of times there are, people need some direct attention with these subjects that they can't really get through classes, and I'm happy to, you know, give them that attention. So
Got it,
yeah,
Evan. And
I've
did you
been. Oh,
yourself get uh, did you get help growing up? Supplemental help like
um,
tutoring?
I I'm certain I did. Though academics always came pretty naturally to me. But
Okay,
I noticed that for a lot of people, they really didn't. So I've always been passionate about helping everyone else out, whether it's classmates or underclassmen or now just high schoolers in general. Now that I'm out of college, so yes, I'm certain I had help at some point, though I really couldn't name um, any specifics. Though I feel like all of us have similar stories. There are plenty of people that in our lives that I think have helped us that we can't even really think of.
got it, Evan. And you said, you spoke about Latin. So if you taught Latin, you must have, taken that up as a subject growing up.
Yeah, yeah,
Latin is not a language that is spoken today, I believe, actively. My
correct.
question
Yeah.
is, what is the thought process behind taking up Latin?
So I actually went to a school where Latin was one of the mandatory subjects that everyone learned. Eventually,
Oh, wow.
I ended
Okay.
up taking AP Latin in high school and doing quite well on that. But I think my passion for it really is it connects us to these people from so long ago who, in many ways, are very different from ourselves. In many ways, are very similar to ourselves. And so, being able to read that language and sort of understand the lives of people who lived so long ago um, is something I'm really interested in. And yeah, yeah,
Right.
I ended up taking a degree in classics in college, so I continued pursuing that throughout university as well.
Got it, Evan. And uh, if there are students, who are probably contemplating taking Latin as a subject or, as a language in their school when they're studying, uh, what are the reasons you think they should go ahead with it? And what are the reasons you think they probably should consider taking something else instead of it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think go with Latin if you're passionate about learning languages in general, or even like uh, Latin in its use is more limited than other languages, I would say nowadays. It's not like you can go to a country and speak Latin with people. But a
Right.
lot of scientific terminology, a lot of medical terminology comes from Latin, and so knowing like those roots can be really useful. Um, Anyone who's
Mhm.
passionate, like there are definitely a lot of different angles you could come at it from. I think the scientific and medical angle, the cultural angle, like I said, like just being interested in sort of this ancient culture of people. Um, I'd say don't go into it if you're very I don't know. I would never caution anyone to stay away from any one specific subject. I think there's something
Right,
for everyone to learn from everything. Um,
right, right.
but I don't know. I feel like it does require a bit of an attention to detail and definitely more of a language mindset. So if someone's incredibly math oriented and just has no interest in um, language as anything other
Language,
than
they
just a
can stay
tool of
away from it.
communication, then I'd say steer clear.
Right. You brought up an interesting point when you said, it's there are some words today that we use that got its roots in Latin. So could it probably help people with the English language and, probably vocabulary and stuff like that?
Yes,
Would things
definitely.
be
Like
better?
I think, if my students had time for it, I would definitely ask them to learn some Latin root words because I think it could help with like SAT vocab very much. Um, but yeah,
Right.
I think if you have the time, it's really worth. It can really improve your English vocabulary as well, since so many words come from Latin.
Got it, Evan. And, apart from teaching while growing up with the intention of helping others or, like a side gig, when was it that you decided to, make this your full-time, you know, career? And what are the factors that you weighed in before choosing to, go full-time on this? Or was it an easy decision for you? Was it a no-brainer? You know what, it comes naturally to me. I'm just gonna dive right in.
Yeah, so I had been with I'm from I work with Ivy Experience as their curriculum development specialist now. I had previously been working with them in a part-time capacity as kind of a side gig up until about I guess about 2.5 years ago. Um, when I offered to come on in a full-time, well, they it was sort of a mutual offer, I should say. Um, I had offered my services with logistics, filling in with any tasks that they needed help with on the internal side, and they were happy to have me on. It's been great, working with them these past few years, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with them. But really, what pushed me to do this as a career more than just like a side hustle or anything like that. Um, I'd say part of it is how flexible you can be with your students and your scheduling. If you're doing this full time, for instance,
Right.
I'm working basically school nights Sunday through Thursday most of the year, so I don't have to work Fridays, which is very nice. Uh, Another aspect of it is uh, coming into this full time, I was able to do a lot of the curriculum development stuff and sort of organizational um, improvements that I um, found really interesting, sort of honestly from my engineering background. So you probably saw. You said you mentioned you looked up my bio that I also got an engineering degree from my university.
Right.
Um, in that degree, I learned a lot about process improvements and like technical writing, and I think those have given me the tools to develop, SAT, ACT curriculum as well as help us improve processes internally. And I don't know, I it going full time and going with this as my career, it's given me the opportunity to use a lot of my skills in really interesting ways, and that's really rewarding to me.
Okay, great. So, um, when you did you also had to think of something like, I'll remain a freelance teacher or a part-time, I'll do my part-time thing with my Ivy experience. And did you think of starting your own independent tutoring practice? You still have a lot of time to build something from ground up. Did you have to think about it and then make a decision, or haven't you yet gone that way thinking of an independent practice?
Yeah, it was a pretty easy decision for me to stay with Ivy Experience. I'm in the Philadelphia area now, but I'm not from here originally, so I don't really know the market. I don't really have any connections around here. So it was a pretty easy decision for me to stay with them. They've been great. They have sort of a very established client base. And it was going to be a lot more stable to stay with them, ironically, as a freelancer than to go my own way. So no, it was never really something I considered. I'd say if
Got it.
you have been in an area for a while and you know the way, like you know the high schools, you know the market, that's definitely something you could consider more. But that was not a consideration I made. No.
Got it, Evan. On the website, it says you're a curriculum development specialist.
Yes.
I'm sure you do tutoring as well.
Yes.
So while you're not tutoring, what do you actually do as a curriculum development specialist? What do you develop?
So recently, what that's entailed is with the changes to the SAT and with the upcoming changes to the ACT, trying to stay abreast of all of that, developing sort of looking for what resources we want to use with our students for those, whether it be practice test platforms, supplemental resources for math or grammar or other such things. And whenever a resource doesn't exist, it's my responsibility to create that resource. Um, so we have some internal, you know, resources we use with our students, worksheets I provide to the tutors, developing as well the curriculum that for our tutors as well, like guiding how they should be approaching sessions with their students, how they should be approaching concepts, etc., and then training them in our methodology.
Got it, Evan. And you spoke about because of your engineering background, you spoke about processes. So, what are the processes that you've refined here, probably at my IB experience, and what are the things that you still think there is potential for improvement?
Mm-hmm. I don't know how specific I can be, but really relating to logistics stuff within the company, um, developing like here's how we add a student to this particular platform. Here's how we um, you know um, here's a new way we can like database clients so that we have all this information in a better
Right.
place. And periodically like revisiting those processes and seeing, is this working for us, is there anything we need from this, and then making any changes we need to make to make our day-to-day run more smoothly, make sure we're serving our tutors and our clients as best we can. So it's really just a sort
Got
of
it.
a cyclical like refining of our day-to-day processes, which is really fun, to be honest.
Got it. And coming back to tutoring, every tutor has a style. Not that they're conscious of it; they probably realize it after a few years. As of now, what do you think your style is? And have you had a chance to sit back and reflect? Okay, this is who I am as a tutor.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question, but I think I have an answer for it. I would say I have a very listening first tutoring style. I'm really trying to gauge where my student is at, and what they know, where their gaps are, before I'm trying to instruct them in anything. For instance, there are some students who, they're perfectly fine on math, like the concepts of math, and they just need someone to help them with the strategy. So I don't want to waste time like talking about trigonometry with them when I could just say, okay, hey, um, here's this time saving trick you can use for such and such question, that'll shave 2 minutes off of how long you're spending on this section and on this type of question. So I'm really, yeah, I kind of I let them come to me and do the talking, and then I synthesize that and kind of develop my strategy from there. Um, I yeah yeah. I don't. Was there another part to that question? I can't quite remember.
No,
Okay. Yeah.
that's pretty much what it was,
Yeah.
from a tutoring style point of view. And do at Ivy experience, do you kind of match students based on the different personalities of tutors that you might have? Or
Yeah, for
uh,
sure.
how does it work? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We that's definitely a big consideration when we're matching students with tutors. Um, for instance, you might have a parent who says their student is, like a quieter student, a little bit more of an anxious student, and so we'll place that student with one of our tutors who's, a little softer, a little bit more encouraging, that sort of thing. Or we might have another student who's like, okay, this kid, you need to kind of whip him into shape, and so we'll put him with one of our tutors who's a little more of a gonna encourage them and kind of be a bit harder on them in an encouraging way, not in
Yeah, yeah.
a rude way.
Got it. Not soft. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, from that point of view, what kind of a tutor are you? So you said you're a listening first tutor,
yeah,
okay, but are you the one who's mapped to the student who needs a little, you know, hard love or tough love?
yeah. I'm more on the soft and encouraging end of things than the tough love end of things, I'd say. We
Okay.
have several tutors who are good at the tough love. I could stand to be better at it, I think. But I think I can employ that when need be. But I don't think that's not one of my core competencies, I'd say.
Got it, Evan. So the students who come to you or who are mapped to you are already coming with intent to study, right? I mean,
Yes,
there is no motivational problems there. They're already
typically,
motivated. They
yeah,
know that, they need to improve.
yeah,
Okay, got it. Got it. And apart from, as a tutor, apart from a subject matter skill, right, knowing your subject, are there other areas that you're trying to, work on, or do you think as a tutor one must, be equipped with certain other skills apart from knowing the language or this subject very well?
yeah, yeah. I think my first year and a half or so as a tutor, I was really, really heavily focused on just teaching the subject matter. Um, and I didn't really have an eye for um, sort of the meta of tutoring, the more psychological component, the more strategy component of it. I mean, of course, there are some pretty basic strategies you can teach. Save your hardest passage for last in reading or something like that. But really getting into the more psychological aspect of it, stamina, fatigue, anxiety, that is not something I had really considered until a couple years in to test prep. So I think that aspect is just as important as the subject matter. Is saying, hey, you can't expect to improve if you're doing all of your practice at midnight after you've been at sports practice all day, because your brain is not working. uh, and then I think another area is really trying to build your students' confidence. A lot of these, as I kind of alluded to, a lot of the students that come to me are some more anxious students, some that kind of need help with their testing self-esteem.
Okay.
And so developing the way to talk to students to sort of help build their confidence and help them feel like they can succeed. Because they can succeed, they just need to feel like they can in order to do so.
Got it, Evan. So, what are the ways that you've come up, to help students who are actually anxious about things, because it could be a tricky sort of a problem to solve. So, do you just say some positive things, or do you do some sort of a student coaching? Do you wear a student coaching hat at that point, or how do you navigate that?
So I guess there are a couple things. Um, The first I would recommend to any student really is to start with testing as soon as possible, to give them as many chances to succeed as they need. Um, because, uh, if a student is coming into testing and, they're a senior and it's September of their senior year and they really only have one or two chances to do well on a test. And that's not going to help with their anxiety at all. So I think as soon the sooner they can start with standardized testing, the better. My other things I'll tell them is, I've seen you. Well, I'll really try to be specific about where I've seen them do well on practice tests or on exercises, just to point out to them, hey, you can do well on this. And it sounds corny, but trying to get them to believe in themselves a little bit. Um, Additionally, I think one area is.
Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
sorry. The last I heard was, I know it sounds corny, and then
Okay.
there was a little bit of a
Yeah.
disconnection.
So I know it sounds corny, but yeah, but getting the students to believe in themselves, essentially,
Right.
pointing out specific areas where they're doing well and saying, "Hey, you can do well here. I know you can do well in these other areas as well if we work at it." Um, Another thing I will try to do is, so at the National Test Prep Conference a couple months ago, Justin Menda, I believe, he gave this really interesting talk about neuropsychology and test prep, I believe was the title of the talk. And one of the things he discussed was how human stress responses really are just the opposite of are really counter effective for taking a standardized test, because you kind of go into this fight or flight response, and it,
Right.
it completely cripples your ability to think logically and reasonably. Um, and so, one of the things I focus on with my students who have like a lot of test anxiety is making some of these processes instinct rather than things they have to think about. Because if they have to think about it, they're probably not going to think about it well, because they're already going to be anxious during the test. So the the more I can just turn this into, hey, when you see this kind of problem, do these steps, um, and not something they have to reason out, the better they tend to do. And then, of course, a lot of it is just stress management techniques, such as box breathing, taking breaks, and sort of stepping back for a second, and stuff like that.
Got it, Evan. And I mean, are there any other things that you're working on? Are there any other gaps or problems that you see students need help with, apart from, the mental aspect, and the subject matter?
Hmm. Other gaps other than the subject matter and the um. I Sorry, it lagged for a second. I'll give you my answer when it
Yeah.
comes back. Okay.
No. So are there, any other things apart from the subject matter and the mental aspect of things? Do you think there are any other problems that you've seen of late that needs, you know, tutors' attention?
Yeah. So one of the other big things I'm working on with my students lately is tricking them into reading comprehension, essentially. Um, so a lot of times, and this is excuse me, and this is mainly with the SAT, with those shorter passages that are, I'd say, tend to be more difficult with the main idea questions and stuff like that. But forcing them to go slow, dissect them sentence by sentence, figure out what each sentence means, um, and it's all in service of trying to get them to um, understand the passage better. Um, but the I'll tell them to look at this sentence and restate what it means in your own words. Of course, basically trying to get them to have an understanding of the passage, but sort of tricking them into doing it by going little by little, not even really thinking of it as reading comprehension, but as reading section tricks.
So, no, it's interesting. You spoke about reading comprehension, tricking students, with respect to reading comprehension, and then you spoke about SAT. I had a conversation a couple of weeks back where, I was told ACT is the one that's difficult for students who are not, big readers or, who have reading problems. So is it the other way around? Do you think ACT is easier for students than
I
SAT?
I think there's a bit of nuance to it, I'd say.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
the ACT is better for fast readers, and the SAT is better for close
Right.
readers.
Interesting.
Yeah. The ACT, of course, those passages are a lot longer, but the questions don't tend to be as uh, the questions I would say tend to be more straightforward than the SAT. But then with the SAT, those passages are a lot shorter, but the questions are a lot more detailed, and generally trickier.
Interesting. So you say ACT is probably for fast readers from your view, and SAT is for slow readers. Okay.
Slow readers, or yeah, um, people who are students who are better with the close reading aspect. Um,
Got it. And so if someone were to ask you, uh, what is better for them, ACT or SAT, based on a diagnostic test, after a student that takes both the tests once, what will you, look for, before telling them, what, either one of them is best for you.
yeah. So of course we'll just look at raw score first of all. If there's one test where they did a lot better than the other, we'll of course recommend that test. Um, Timing in on the ACT is also something we'll consider. If they are running out of time on the ACT, then that might be a point in favor of the SAT, where they'll have more time per question. Um,
Mm.
Other things we'll consider are uh, English section performance. Um, in our experience, we tend to find that students increase pretty rapidly on the ACT English section. So that's another thing we'll take into consideration. Um, and then
Interesting.
science section as well. Sometimes, well, historically, science section for some students can provide some beneficial padding to their score. We also find students tend to increase there pretty rapidly. That's something I think we'll have to reconsider as the ACT changes format and the science section is not included in the composite score anymore. But I think we'll have to wait for further information from colleges and from the ACT about various decisions they're making before we come to a conclusion on that.
Got it, Evan. So you're saying that, okay, if you have someone, whose English is not great, whose reading isn't up to the mark, you're saying that, they'd better take ACT because improving ACT English is easier than SAT English. Is that right?
That's what we've seen historically. Yes, yeah. Um, I'd say, yeah, timing difficulties and sort of learning accommodations are things we consider as well. If a student
Right.
is having timing issues, as I said, I think we'd go SAT. But if they have
Mm,
sort of a time accommodation, for instance, if they get time and a half on the ACT, that can make that test a lot easier for a student. So if they have, for instance, time and a half accommodations for the ACT, I might consider ACT instead. Because as I said, my general concept.
what do you mean when you say time and a half accommodation? Sorry, I
So
don't understand.
if a student has like documented learning differences such as ADHD or something like that, they might be able to request accommodations from the ACT, instead
Oh,
of
right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So 50% extra time on sections.
Right. Got it. Okay. And one of the things that I'm, hearing is the reading levels or the reading quality uh, is decreasing among students, you know, um of late. Is that something that you agree with? Is that something that you observe as well when you work with students, Evan?
Um, I'd say I so I have been in tutoring test prep since uh 2022. So a
Hmm.
little under 3 years now. Of course, I'd done a
Right.
lot of tutoring before then. Um,
Mm.
but I don't know if I've been working with students on a long enough timeline to have a conclusive opinion on that. Um,
Right.
I'd say I am sometimes surprised by some students' reading comprehension level, um, but maybe it's just bias, having had more years of experience learning to have reading comprehension than they have. um,
Right.
yeah, I'm not sure I could say that for sure. I I have heard the same thing from a lot of people. But
Hmm.
I think I'll need to. That's not something I think I have a conclusive answer on. There are certainly students I've had who have very, very good reading comprehension. So I
Right.
don't know if
Right.
it's every student is getting worse. Maybe it's just the average has gone down, and maybe that's due to changes in how schooling is done since COVID and whatnot. Um, yeah, that's. I don't know if I could be an authority on that.
Got it, Evan. And what does it take? You know, would you say there are no shortcuts to kind of increase your reading scores, or would you? I mean, what I mean when I say is you don't have any shortcuts, you got to you should have read when you had the opportunity to. Growing up, it's a gradual process. It can't be built up in a few weeks. Do
Yeah,
you
I'd
believe
say
that,
it's
or
as I mentioned earlier, I try to trick my students into learning reading comprehension. It is a slow
right?
process. I think usually on a normal 3 month timeline, I don't know how far. Some students get pretty far, some don't. Um, it
Hmm.
really depends on sort of their aptitude for it coming into things. I
Right.
have some I have seen students go from very low reading scores to very high reading scores over the course of a few months. So nothing is universal, but I'd certainly say um, there are not many shortcuts. As I mentioned, I try to trick them into reading comprehension, but that's something that is tough um, to build up quickly. I'd say I would definitely agree with you. Um,
Got it.
yeah.
Got it, Evan. And about SAT going digital, what are the differences you've seen, not in the SAT, SAT pen and paper versus SAT digital? I'm asking from an outcome point of view, or from, what is, panned out after the SAT going digital, from, from a tutor's outlook on students. How do you see, I mean, do you see any changes?
Um, the the transition from the paper SAT to the digital SAT happened close to the time that I went from part time and working with many, many, many students to full time and working with fewer students and working on other stuff as well. I can't really say I've noticed a strong difference in outcomes. I could certainly go and run the statistics on the students I had before and the students I've had after. Um, but the spread is generally about the same for me. I will say I don't see as many students on the lower end of things. Um,
Right.
but maybe that's just because I'm working with a different subset of students than I was before. Or
Got
maybe
it,
I've
Evan.
just gotten better at my job.
Right. Got it. And As a curriculum development specialist and as a tutor, at my experience, what are the problems that you're, trying to solve, the top two problems that you're trying to solve for the company?
Um, I'm trying to make sure we have sort of a more universal, standardized system of resources, um, and to make the whole basically providing our tutors with everything they could need to succeed with any test prep student. So that's one of my more general goals. One of my more specific goals right now is preparing for the changes to the ACT. Um, Ever since they announced their digital offerings and their big changes over the past few months, um, I've really been trying to prepare us for that. It's a very similar process to when the SAT went digital previously. So thank goodness that already happened. So that kind of gave me a an outline for how this sort of thing goes. um, but yeah, I'd say those are my main two priorities right now: are uh, revamping our sort of whole system of tutor resources and student resources, as well as getting ready for the new version of the ACT.
Got it. And while you do that, are there any problems that you're facing, uh, or you know, or do you have a process in place and it's going smooth and fine for you?
Um, so I'm certainly a planner. I like
Okay.
to flesh out the skeleton of things uh,
Mhm.
as much as I can before getting into the details. So for the general resource update, that that's kind of been my strategy. So not too many issues there. The main thing with the ACT is that they just really have not released a ton of information other than what they've said in a few presentations. They, I believe, are giving more information in the coming months soon. So a lot of it has just been frustratingly a wait and see sort of thing for the ACT. Um, I'm certainly up to date on everything we know now, but it's tough to give resources to my tutors when the ACT hasn't given many resources to me. um, so I that situation will change soon, but it's been in the meantime it's been a little tough.
Got it. Got it, Evan. And going back to uh, the way you described your life at my IB experience, you said it's got a lot to do with being flexible with availability of students and stuff like that. So, what does your typical day as a tutor and a curriculum development specialist look like?
Yeah,
Do you have a
so
fixed time, or is it all over the place?
it's certainly a lot of flex time, yeah. Um, which is very nice compared to when I was part time, I was doing a lot of in person sessions, a lot of house calls, and now I fully work from home, which is wonderful. So I can be a lot more flexible in what that looks like. Typically, I'll come in mid morning and work until around 8 or 9, Sunday
Right.
through Thursday, depending on my schedule, really. I'll I mostly have students in the evenings, of course, and then the rest of the day I am. Well, I'll start usually by answering any emails that are in my inbox in the mornings. We'll have throughout the week a few meetings to sort of discuss the state of things, get us oriented for upcoming goals, upcoming deadlines, that sort of thing. Um,
Right.
I have a big hand in recommending to families which test, SAT or ACT, the students take.
All
So
right.
I'm
Okay.
I'm reviewing a lot of those results, and then
So, how do you do that? Do you have a diagnostic test that you offer, or do they take it elsewhere and then show the
we have a
results to you?
diagnostic we offer. And we usually have them compare that with one of the Blue Book SATs or a PSAT. Um,
Right.
and yeah, I will score those, and well, yeah, our team will score those, and I'll make my recommendation based on the factors I mentioned earlier, as well as any of the small things I noticed, any other information they give us. Um, so once I've done all that admin stuff for the morning is when uh, around or slightly after lunchtime is when I get into my actual projects. Sort of, I'll look at my checklist of things I need to get done for the week and chip away at
Right.
those as much as I can. Ask colleagues any questions I need to ask them about. Hey, how do we want to make this decision? What do you have anything I should consider when I'm thinking about this? Towards the end of the week, I'll have a meeting with other members of my team to discuss, hey, what should I be working on for the rest of the week or for the upcoming week? And what's our long term vision over the next couple months? So I think having those frequent check ins with my supervisor and other members of my team is great. It really keeps everything on track for everybody. Um, and with a primarily virtual company like ours, it's really useful for feeling like you're part of a team.
Right. Got it, Evan. Evan, I think I've asked you all the questions that I'd listed out to ask you, and some of the questions were, as we spoke, and I love the part where you differentiate between the SAT and ACT. Thank you so much for your time, and it was an absolute pleasure talking to you,
Of
Evan.
course, it was a pleasure talking to you, Jack. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Before we leave, I'll just stop the recording.